for me, I didn't stop being anything. For me, Judaism, Torah wisdom, contains within it the left-wing values. I never dropped those.
Mm-hmm.
I never dropped my love of humanity. I never dropped my vision of, a kind, decent, liberal society in which people are free to discover their own opinions, to try out things and have trial and error.
Welcome back to the One Jewish State podcast. I'm Ambassador David Friedman. You know, as an American, we in America tend to think the world revolves around us. Maybe it does in some respects, but when it comes to Judea and Samaria, the world really revolves around the state of Israel and its people. And one of the things we're trying to do is to make the case, not just in America, but in Israel as well, that the best outcome for Israelis, Palestinians, Jews who are secular, Jews who are religious, everybody, the best outcome is Israeli sovereignty. To understand better the mindset, if you will, of the people of Israel, and there's no one who speaks for everyone, but to get a little bit more of a sense, do a deeper dive into some of these issues, I wanted to speak to someone who's lived in both worlds, lived in the secular world, lived in the religious world, understands the mindset, who's lived in this country long enough to really understand what Israelis care about, because it's not always what we think about in America. And I met someone who I thought really could contribute greatly to this discussion. His name is Nir Menussi. He's going to tell you himself a little bit about himself, but when I met him in Pardes Chana a few weeks ago, I was just captivated by the breadth of his experience and his deep understanding of how Israelis process information and view some of these weighty issues, especially issues about our great, majestic biblical legacy. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce to all of you Nir Menussi. Nir, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, listen, your background is fascinating, and I know it already, but not too many other people probably do. So why don't you just start by telling us, how you came into this world, a little bit about your family, a little about how you grew up, and a little bit about your journey, if you will.
So how I came into the world begins in the Yom Kippur War. I think my mother was pregnant with me during the Yom Kippur War. I was born in 1974. To what my father defined as an ultra-Orthodox secular family. We lived in the state of Tel Aviv, in this world in its own, which is the Tel Aviv, very left-wing bohemian family. My father grew up in a kibbutz. He was very much a Zionist, but very, very secular. Loved the Bible, could quote whole chapters of the Bible by heart, was a lover of Hebrew, was very much connected to the land, but was also devoutly secular, as I said, and totally on the left. My mother grew up in an ultra-Orthodox Haredi family in Jerusalem, but left early on, went to Betzalel, from there to New York, met my father, and then they lived in Tel Aviv, and they worked together. They did political cartoons. My father was a celebrity. He was well known. Everyone in Israel over 45, I would say, would know his name.
What was his name?
His name was David Menussi. Didi is short for Yedidia. He was on TV, in talk shows, and he would write political satire in rhymes. And the biggest publication in Israel, Yediot Achronot. It's a genre that doesn't exist in English so much, but it was very big here. And people would read it. It would be easier to read, more fun to read than all the op-eds, the regular op-eds. So every week he would have two of those, and he was just a very colorful character. He was a storyteller. He traveled all over the world when he was younger. He was a reporter for the UN in the Korea War. He was also much older than me, so he was in the Palmach and fought in the first wars of Israel. Was there just seconds after the paratroopers in 1967. So very much his history, his personal history, and the history of the Jewish state are extremely closely tied. But he didn't inculcate us with a strong Jewish or even Zionist identity.
I want to jump on something you said. I'm paraphrasing, but sort of religiously secular or deeply committed to secularism, if you will.
Yeah.
And I should take a step back and just say, because just to make clear, we're not here to beat up on people who are secular or people who aren't people of faith. I mean, I think I love every Israeli, and I think every one of them contributes importantly to the state. And but I think we need to understand mindsets in order to move forward and try to be persuasive in a respectful way. And so, because I've observed at least that many of the deeply religiously secular Israelis don't share my views, for example, on the importance of retaining biblical Israel. Help me understand the mindset a little bit better. What is it about the view that that drives that commitment to being, if you will, anti-religious or being intensely secular?
So I would say it's a combination of a few things. The first is it starts with just being not connected, when you don't have a traditional Jewish education. It's not so much what you have against Judaism as not having enough for it. You're not connected to the Talmud, you're not connected to the Jewish customs. You have a certain version of the holidays that you like observing. It's a deep sense of alienation from tradition. And then you look at religious Jews and you just look at them as if through a screen of again, alienation. It's just something that's foreign to you. It seems that has to do with the exile. It's galuti, it has to do, we've passed that. So the whole idea of forming a new Jew was so fundamental to secular Zionism that for me, it was weaker, and that could open me up to what later on became my process of return to Judaism. But for their generation, it was so strong that we need a clean slate, just start with a clean slate. So everything that reminds you of being in exile, of traditional Judaism, you just want to be away from it, and there's not enough of an emotion of being connected. American Jews, for them, even the very secular ones, they would go to shul at least 2 times a year, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. They would feel in front of the millions, billions of non-Jews all around them. They would need a sense of a community and identity that connects them to. But for secular Israelis, they don't need that. They're in the land of Israel. They speak Hebrew, and almost everyone around them is Jewish. And so they're exempt. They don't need to hold on to anything that would connect them to traditional Judaism. This is very much the home that I grew up in.
Is it a rejection as well of victimhood? Post-Holocaust, we need to be strong. We need to be independent. We're not going to get pushed around anymore. It got beaten up anymore. Is that part of it as well? That this feeling that the religious are just not fit. They're not fighters. They're not standing up for themselves.
That's part of it. It accounts for not being associated with the ultra-Orthodox or the Haredi community.
Right.
If you look at the other ones, then the chasm is different. It's more political. It has to do with the right and the left. But mostly it has to do with the fact that you feel like you don't need it anymore. That the commandments and the holidays and all this, it helped us survive the 2,000 years of exile, and now that we're here, we don't need it anymore. And my house was also a bit of an extreme in the sense that we didn't observe the holidays at all. We didn't have a mezuzah. Like when you're talking about one of my earliest memories, how I even learned that there was such a thing called a mezuzah, is that when I was about 7 years old, we moved from the Tel Aviv apartment to a bigger house in Ramat Gan. And so everyone who came in, my parents, they gave him a tour of the house, and the tour always began with the same sentence. As you can see, we don't have a mezuzah on our door. And so I never heard of it.
It's a point of pride.
It was point of pride. Yeah. It was the first thing to say, and I never heard of a mezuzah, but so I internalized from a very young age that there's something very important that's called the mezuzah. You have to make sure you don't have it on your door.
Didn't you?
Because for them it was there's no in between. That was my parents.
But what are you learning? What are you learning in school? I mean, they must be teaching you something about the Bible, about the history of the Jewish people. I mean, it's not completely foreign even to secular Israelis, is it?
Yeah, so the education we got is that we had a lot of hours a week dedicated to Bible, to Tanakh. Nothing, zero, or almost zero, that had to do with the Talmud, with rabbinic wisdom and literature. It was I never saw a Talmudic page. I didn't know what the Mishnah was, the Talmud was very vague, and I didn't learn it. So, and the thing is that the Tanakh that you learn, the Bible that you learn, it's only through a very academic, critical lens. So it doesn't involve you in the story, and it was the one subject I hated the most. I hated biblical studies the most. I couldn't wait to get rid of it. And so what happened was that I had a lot of hours dedicated to Bible studies, but I saw zero relevance to my life.
So when you're in a classroom and you're learning about Jerusalem and its history, and King David and King Solomon, or Shiloh and Samuel, or Beit El and Yaakov, Jacob.
I couldn't find them on the map.
You couldn't find them on the map.
I went to the Western Wall. Everyone goes to the Western Wall, but I didn't go to the Tomb of David. I didn't go to Shiloh until much later.
Yeah.
I couldn't care less, because all around you, you're surrounded by modern Western pop culture. That's basically, Hollywood was far more of an identity builder for me than my own Jewish or Israeli heritage.
That continues today? I mean, there are places in Israel where that's still continuing?
It's worse, because the hours a week dedicated to biblical studies, because it became such a hated subject, decreased. And so actually the people today going through regular mainstream secular education, they know even less about the Bible than I did.
It's really astounding. I mean, because I grew up in New York, went to a Jewish day school, and that's almost all I learned, for half the day. And the stories were incredible, and we jumped into these stories and understood them, and it was, but then again, we weren't living in Israel, we weren't speaking Hebrew, we weren't living a day-to-day Jewish existence. So I suppose, people think they don't need it if they're living there already, but they do.
That's what you said just now is the most important thing. You have to understand that Israeli identity became a substitute for Jewish identity. That's a major part of Israeli culture that many chutznikim, many Jews outside of Israel don't fully get this. That the Israeli identity and culture, and mostly it's the language and it's being here. These two things are a substitute. It's like you're immune. It's like when you're immune to something, or you get a vaccine, you internalize a little bit of whatever it is you want to reject, and then you don't need it anymore. So I live here, I speak Hebrew, so now I don't need to account for being Jewish too much.
How much of that mindset, percentage-wise, would you say is still driving the Israeli psyche? I mean, is it half the people like that, or it's because we've seen the development over the last generation of this whole middle ground, right? Not Haredi, not secular. These religious Zionists who are big and strong and wear kippot, and they're proud, and you can see them all down the streets with the rifles on their backs, and they learn in yeshivot, and they fight in the wars, and some of them are the best soldiers, the bravest soldiers. So it's it seems like from when you were growing up to where we are today, we have bridged it a little bit. I'm just wondering, how, what part of the country is, Haredi, religious Zionist, secular? I mean, it sounds like we have all three of them, and other variations as well going on here.
So the numbers you can download, but definitely what changed is very simple demographics. The more hardcore left-wing secular people are having less kids than the religious Zionists and the Haredim. And that's a major part of what's going on over the past few decades in Israel. I would say it's the most important metamorphosis that this country is going through. And that has created a middle ground. The middle ground is built definitely around the the religious Zionists. And also many of them become more secular or less religious. Some of them take off their yarmulkes, some of them keep their yarmulkes. But even those who take off their yarmulkes, they stop being observant, they remain much more with strong Jewish, not just Israeli, Jewish identity, and a commitment to tradition, And in fact, it's hard for them to marry total seculars. They would marry among. So that definitely, that's part of what's been going on here, is that the old elite is, I don't know if I should say panicking or losing its power. And much of everything that's been going on the past few years with the judicial reform and the fights for it and against it, it revolves around this shift that's been going on, that the country is becoming more traditional, more religious, more Jewish, less Israeli, cosmopolitan, universal.
Yeah. Look, it's a country that was dominated for most of its certainly the first 50 years of its existence. It was all the Labor Party. It was a left-wing party. Now,
first 30 years,
Labor and Meretz, the two left-wing parties, they can cobble together maybe 6-7 seats, and the country is either right or center-right. What I think is interesting about Israel, I've noticed, and people have said, it's one of the few places in the world where younger people are more conservative than their parents. You won't find that. You won't find that in America. You won't find that anywhere else. I mean, kids are naturally,
And I think October 7th contributed.
It made it even more exacerbated it for sure. I mean, I think it's probably a good thing, but you see Israel moving in that direction. But there's still, I think I may have mentioned this story to you when we met the first time. But when I was, I've met with lots of secular Israelis from a business perspective. Some of them are just, brilliant, and they've created huge companies, and they're very successful. And we talk business, but we also talk, some politics. And when I ask about, Yudav Shomron, about Judea and Samaria, their response is, who needs it? Like, I don't want to rule over people who don't want to be ruled on. I don't want my kids to risk their lives. And then, I would say, well, let's talk about a place. And I mentioned, Shiloh, and explained that this was the Jerusalem before there was Jerusalem, and how Samuel was born here, and Hannah taught the world how to pray. She really offered the first prayer in history. And after that whole conversation, I said to him, well, what do you want to do? You want to keep it, or do you want to give it away? Because if you give it away to the Palestinians, they will do everything they can to destroy any connection to the Jewish history. They'll destroy the archaeology.
Hebron, Kiryat
same is true all these places. And his response was, we have to keep it. And I said to him, what do you mean we have to keep it? I said, you don't even believe in God. Why do you have to keep it for? He says, it's who we are as a people. It's in our DNA.
That was in 5 minutes.
This was in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I came away, that was the conversation that has driven me to write the book, One Jewish State. That's why we're sitting here talking, spending money on videographers to make these. It's all because of that conversation, because I realized it's not an ideological difference between the right and the left in Israel. It's an educational difference. I said to him, how come you didn't feel this way before we had this conversation? It's because he didn't explain it to me. Nobody explained it to me.
Nobody explained it. Yeah.
And that's why we made the movie, Route 60, to educate people. My friends, One Jewish State is hot off the presses. Just been published. It is the intellectual foundation for Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. It's a book which makes the case for Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria as being good for Israel, being good for the Palestinians, being good for the region, being good for stability, and I would add, it achieves God's will as set forth in the holy texts. So I hope you'll buy the book. It's available wherever you buy books. Obviously, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. You can get it at lots of different places. You can just Google it and find it, and they'll ship it to you overnight. And it is One Jewish State, the last best hope for peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Enjoy the read. It's like asking an American, would you give away the Statue of Liberty? Would you give away the Washington Monument? They said, of course not. At what price? No price. There's no price. I'd give it away. And as you explain, and this is 3,000 years old, they're far more authentic, far more organic to the Jewish people. And when they understand that, it's a whole different perspective. And that's not being taught in Israel at all.
Yeah, that's so right. And the fact that it happened so quickly just goes to show how big the vacuum is in terms of being disconnected, disassociated from our own roots. It's not just Jewish holy sites in the land of Israel. It's the whole Torah. It's the whole spiel of what Judaism is all about. It's a universe of values, of pieces of wisdom, of a way of thinking, of a way of living, of humor. All this tapestry of what being Jewish is all about. and the depth of the wisdom and the divine, inspiration you get from learning Torah sources, all this has been taken away, has been robbed of people.
Yeah.
My feeling is, I remember reading Harry Potter for the first time, and I said, oh my God, this is the story of every secular Jew. You're born and your identity is being hidden away from you. You don't know that you have a treasure in the bank. It's a massive treasure on your name, a spiritual treasure that has your name on it. And you're supposed to inherit it. Nobody tells you that. I even thought he has the little scar. They tell him it was an accident. It wasn't an accident.
I didn't read the book, so
but everyone else knows.
Everybody else read the book.
That was, for me, it was like being circumcised. When you're circumcised, they told you, oh, it's for hygienic reasons. Or it's just what people do. And they don't realize this is a covenant. This has so much meaning to it. It connects you to Abraham, connects you to all the patriarchs, connects you to Jewish history. Yeah. The meaning of what it means to have a covenant with God. And they just brush it away by saying, oh, it's something hygienic, something whatever. You don't think about it, you just do it. And that's like the Harry Potter scar, that everything is brushed away and belittled until a guy with a big beard and who's not polite smashes the door, comes in and tells him, Harry, you're a wizard. You're Jewish. you have this heritage. You have this identity. You have this thing that's waiting for you. You have to learn in a new place. It's going to teach you amazing things.
So here's my thesis about that takes what you said a step further. So the treasure, right, which is, which lives inside of books and history and learning and scholars, is something which to some extent you can export all around the world, right? I mean, there are huge institutions of learning throughout the world and great scholars, great scholarship. In fact, in our history, you can make the case that our best scholars are the ones that live outside of Israel. The Babylonian Talmud, right, that occurred in exile. But having said that, I would say that the ability to take all that learning and then to land it in the actual places where the events occurred, to talk about a biblical story and then to be there, to ground it in fact, in truth, is enormously powerful. So it doesn't mean everybody has to live in Israel, but the ability of every Jew to go back to Shiloh or Beit El or Jerusalem, okay, or Hebron or Beit Lechem, to be there, okay, and to walk the same steps as our biblical heroes and our forefathers, is what I think takes whatever learning we've accumulated and it just amplifies it, significantly.
By embodying it and situating it within a place, within a geographical center.
It makes it true. It makes it true, which is, to me, it's all the difference. I mean, I've seen it, with lots of friends that have come with me. I've taken them on tour. People in the government, these places were off limits before I became the ambassador, any of these places. And then, I just kind of broke those restrictions. I remember taking, Christian or non-denominational Americans, just brought them here. We would go, for example, to the city of David, to Ir David, right? And we would just show them, this is where King David lived. This could be where he, glanced over at Bathsheba. This is where there's nothing like it. Yeah. And I think our ability to perpetuate our legacy without those, it's like trying to clap with one hand. It's just not. It doesn't work.
I think it's a very powerful statement and way of looking at things. I would add that this movement from the uprooted scholarly universe that's non-local, that Jews have been wandering the earth and with their books, carrying their books on their backs, and you're saying, let's take all this accumulated wisdom and scholarship and center it and basically root it back into the land. And you're absolutely right that it's very powerful and complete, and also, as you said, grounded in truth. I would just add that it has to be also the impetus for then yet another movement, which is Mitzion Tetzeh Torah. Torah shall spread forth from Tzion, in order to share all the Jewish wisdom with the world. Well, we can do it right now without having sovereignty, we can just open the YouTube channel, but there's something, just like you said, just as grounding this whole world of wisdom within the place, it also gives you an additional, it could be the end of a process, of one process, one millennia-long process, and it could be the beginning of another sort of movement of spreading this wisdom on the outside. When you have a place, it's like you can build a lighthouse. When you have a place that's yours, and you can build a lighthouse. I think if you just think about it as a nation state, you narrow the vision of what we're about. We're about having this place in order to...
Well, it's supposed to be, a light unto the nations, or an or lagoyim. And just contrast that, with the criticisms now of Israel, which are unfounded and unfair and anti-Semitic, but the hatred and the anger. And, hopefully we'll get through this dark period in our history, but we're just perpetually right now on defense. The offense is to be here in Israel, as you say, and exporting that light, shining that light, so that instead of people saying, Israel's a colonizing country, people say, look, this is, as you say, Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah, the wellspring of Judeo-Christian values comes right here, and we're looking there for guidance, for wisdom. It's where it all started, and it can inspire an entire world. I want to get to your current life, because we talked about what you're not. Now let's talk about what you are. You've had this. Tell me about this journey, because obviously you weren't raised to be an observant Jew, a deep thinker.
I wasn't born with the suit and the beard.
I forget about the suit and the beard, because that's
outside.
That's the the window dressing. But how did you kind of come to where you are today, where not just observing, but kind of a deep thinker in Jewish thought and Jewish values, and I'd love to hear more about that.
So I'll give you the highlights. So the first highlight was I was 21. No, actually, I need to start a little bit before. When I was younger, I wasn't called Neil as I'm called now. I was called Neil for some reason. I got the name, and it's not an Israeli name. It sounds like European or American.
Yeah, Neil. A lot of people.
Yeah, Neil. I was called Neil. It was very strange to be an Israeli called Neil, but that's what my parents chose, and I call it's an export name. It's a name that makes you feel like you belong in the outside, the big world.
Right.
And so that I had from very early on, I felt that I was locked up in this tiny land outside of where everything is really happening. So I would watch, American movies and read American or European, whatever books. And I felt that I need to be there, not here. And from a very young age, I felt that I need to run away, just run away from Israel, Judaism, everything that's too local. I needed to be a citizen of the world. And when I was about 12 years old, I was somehow able to wade through, it was an Agatha Christie book from cover to cover. Not that I understood everything, but I was able to make it through. And then I almost made like a nearly conscious vow, which is I'm not going to read Hebrew anymore. I'm just going to read English. And I was obsessed with just becoming the best English speaker I can become. And then the moment I could, I'm going to run away from this country like a bat out of hell, and I'm going to be a man of the world like I was meant to be.
Right.
And correct this error that I was born. And once I finished with the army, I was 21. I was planning for this for almost 10 years. I went to England to study art, and I left. I just left with no intention of ever coming back. And for the first few weeks, I was in a state of euphoria. I was in a dormitory with people from all over the world, and I bought a big map, and I would put pins where I met a guy from this place, from that place. And I was just, and I felt it was like a kind of secular messianic era that the European Union was forming, and you had the Eurail ticket, and you could go anywhere. So for a few weeks, I felt that I was like in a dream. And then I started asking people, the young people around me, they were all 20-year-olds. And I would ask them about their heritage, about their history, their folklore, the religion of their countries, the mythology, the folk tales, and they couldn't tell me anything. No one could tell me anything, and they mumbled a few words about this and that tradition or holiday, whatever. They couldn't tell me anything. And at some point, I became really angry, and inside I was going like, you were just a bunch of spoiled liberal kids who know nothing about your own heritage, and what's the point of all of us coming together if we can't form this rich mosaic and everyone has to bring their own tradition or history, and then we can weave this rich tapestry of a global community.
Right.
And of course, and I know, but there was no mirror
Right.
for me to look at. It was ridiculous that I had all these thoughts and didn't realize that I fall into the exact same category until it was a girl from India who told me, hang on, what can you tell me about your own history and tradition about Judaism? Because all I know about Judaism is I once saw a picture of a boat with animals going into the boat. And that's, can you tell me anything else? Mm-hmm. Is there anything else to know about Judaism other than the little story? And then it hit me that I'm part of the same deal. And this whole notion of being universal, being cosmopolitan, being a person of the world, having this new identity, it just creates another bubble, which is even another echo chamber that's even it's worse than the other echo chambers because it believes that you think you're not in an echo chamber.
Right. Right.
It's like in an aquarium that's more transparent than the other ones. You feel that you're not in an aquarium, but you are, mm-hmm. and you're in the worst echo chamber. So that was a crazy moment. And that at the exact same time, it was the time that Rabin was assassinated. And being a left-winger, all my friends were, lighting candles. And regardless of the left and the right, it just made me realize that I feel connected. They're all there, and I'm here in the middle of London, England. And it was 5th of November. It's a British national holiday. Mm-hmm. They have fireworks going on.
Yeah, well.
And bonfires. And everyone was celebrating, and I was mourning because my prime minister, so I realized you can't be universal without being local, without belonging to being connected to your own roots. And so after that year was over, with my tail between my legs, I came back. I realized I still want to be universal, global, whatever, but it has to be, global. And I have to be
right.
So that was I would say the first step. I came to Israel. Went to Jerusalem. I said to myself, I grew up in Tel Aviv. I know Tel Aviv. I don't know Jerusalem. I always loved Jerusalem because it had history. It wasn't a 100-year-old city. It had 3,000 years old. I loved the fact that there were ancient houses and layers of history and people speaking a lot more languages.
But this is still you're not.
But I'm still totally secular.
Yeah, I'm saying you're not
totally left. Totally left.
Got it.
I began to be active in Peace Now and B'Tselem and all that, and so there was very much on that side. Now, what happened in Jerusalem is that in Jerusalem you can't ignore Judaism and Jewish tradition. I lived in a very secular Lechavia neighborhood, and I would study in the very secular university.
Right nearby here.
Mount Scopus. Mm-hmm. But the bus would go through Geula, would go through an ultra-Orthodox neighborhood. So every day, twice a day, I would go through the time tunnel.
That was the number 9?
I think it was 9 or 19.
It was 9 bus, I think. Yeah, I used to take that bus.
And so from Lechavia to Mount Scopus, every day, it was just like seeing a movie of people who are dressed, it looked like 19th century clothes. Right. And there were posters and the little girls with the skirts playing and very little technology, and it was just crazy to look at it. And then I would meet a lot of people who would seem totally secular at the university. And then it turns out that they're ex-religious. So you have a lot of religious people, ex-religious people, and all around you, you're surrounded by this. And so that was like in the background. And then in my second year at university, I was very fortunate to meet going back to the Harry Potter metaphor, my Hagrid. So Hagrid, you haven't read it, but Hagrid is the guy with the big beard who tells Harry Potter that he's a wizard.
Right.
So I met someone who very, very interesting, unique individual who was very religious, but he was studying history and philosophy of science in Hebrew University, which was the same topic that I was taking. Mm-hmm. And for me, if you're very well-read and very modern, you can't be religious. That's how it was for me at that time. Mm-hmm. And the other way around. If you're very religious, you can't have a lot of education.
Right.
And he broke that stereotype completely. And so I like telling the story this way, that, that there's the Darwin diagram of the little monkey that's growing up to be an ape and then to be human. So for me, between the ape and the human, there was the religious person. He was like the missing link.
Right.
And just like apes are still around, then you have religious people are still around, but we've all advanced. They're just, they somehow belong to
They're vestiges.
Yeah, vestiges.
Right.
And as long as they don't want to do a Planet of the Apes,
right.
I'm okay with that. I'm pluralistic. I'm tolerant, and most religious people at the university, they seemed like, polite apes to me, meaning they didn't pronounce so much their religiosity, and they would hide it, and they would have their little yarmulke, but they would. And I felt that they were normal, but they have all this crazy hobby.
Right.
And then I met this guy who has a beard and he had chaos, and he was like a free ape, but he was very educated. So it was the whole thing that broke my categories of thinking, and my stigma basically against the fact that you couldn't be very religious and very, very educated. And the more we spoke, every conversation was just incredibly meaningful for me. And I realized there's this guy here who has everything that I have, and then he has a whole universe of knowledge that I don't have. He has both worlds. And I remember coming to his house. He was still single. He was living with a roommate. And I came to his place, and first I went to his bedroom, and he had a big library of secular books, psychology, history, everything that impressed me. And I said, wow, he reads all the right books, and even some books I didn't know about. And I really had a lot of admiration for him. And then we moved to the living room. And at another library, there was like 8 times bigger of holy books, of Torah books. I couldn't wrap my head around it. How can you have all this knowledge and still think that this Torah and this religion and these values that are so old, and that you've been carrying them for thousands of years, are more meaningful to you? And he told me, I'm going to the university because when I study philosophy and history and psychology, it helps me explain things that the Torah is very terse about. The Torah doesn't speak much about this world, but then I can combine it, and I can look at it through the lens and the light of the Torah, of religion, of faith, and it becomes much, much richer. So that was just blew me away. And it didn't happen in one moment, but over the course of 2 years and more conversations, it opened me up to this whole thing. There was a whole other mystical aspect to it. I started having, dreams and things that opened me up, because I was such a materialist. I didn't believe in the soul, in the world to come, in God. I was a strict materialist. So there was a lot of shells to break through, but it was an incredible period of my life that things just opened up.
So now, what do you've traversed this chasm,
Yeah.
And look, we're not expecting the entire, nation of Israel to be that educated and that fluent in either Torah study or secular studies. I mean, you have a unique exposure to great wisdom on both sides, but we do want to, sort of move the people of Israel to a more educated place. I mean, more thoughtful place, more Jewish place, right? As you said from the beginning, it's this idea that Israel is a substitute for Judaism. That's not a good idea. That was never anybody's intent, and we sort of drifted in that direction.
You can substitute a 3,000-year-old identity with a whole massive library in it.
Right. With
something that's 70 years old.
Yeah. And by the way, look, I'm I guess in Hebrew you'd say dan lekaf zchut. I mean, I'm not that critical of the left in a sense that to create the state of Israel in 1920s and 1930s, with malaria and with, hostile neighbors and the massive amount of self-sacrifice from people that came from Europe, a lot of them pretty good lives, right? So you sort of needed... No judging.
So
you sort of, the fact that they were socialists, I sort of get it. The idea that you had to subordinate your individual needs to that of the state back then, it might have been the time for it, and it's not the time for it anymore. So without judging, without being critical, but I think like you say, there is this glorious, majestic 3,000-year-old history, and it all lives here. It lives within the rocks and the stones and the dirt. And how do we just make people more cognizant of it and care about it more and more sensitive to it? Obviously, people who are religious and who study it, they understand it. But my goal through this is not to make people more religious, but to make them more educated. And whether they want to become religious, that's up to them. That's between them and their.
It belongs to them. It doesn't belong to anyone.
You're right.
People are deprived of their own legacy.
Exactly.
They're deprived of their own legacy. You don't have a choice, a real choice, until you know what you're missing.
Exactly.
And then you can have the real choice. And it's all your own choice. The freedom of choice is a divine gift. Nobody wants to take that away. It's the most precious divine gift you can have. But people don't really have that. They think the word choice and freedom are the first words they would say of what they value the most.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't have real choice and real freedom if you don't know where you came from. And if you don't know what is your inheritance.
If you haven't tasted all the food, you don't know what's the best thing on the menu. I mean, it's sad. It's like you say. Also, I think even now on a related issue, which is not as prevalent here, but back in the States, we're fighting anti-Semitism every day, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And I think it's the same point. People say to me, "How do you fight anti-Semitism?" I said, "Well, look, get better police, get better, intelligence on who the people are." I mean, that's. But to really, it's not about fighting the anti-Semites. It's about empowering the Jews. Once the Jews know what they're fighting for, they'll win. But they have to know what they're fighting for, right? And it's the same point. It's not. You said it so well. The idea that people cannot be deprived of this 3,000-year-old legacy, and then once they have it, I think we all trust they'll make better decisions, probably the right decisions, but it has to start there.
And I have to add two things. One is that you said before, we spoke about what you aren't, and let's speak about what you are.
Right.
For me, I didn't stop being anything. For me, Judaism, Torah wisdom, contains within it the left-wing values. I never dropped those.
Mm-hmm.
I never dropped my love of humanity. I never dropped my vision of a kind, decent, liberal society in which people are free to discover their own opinions, to try out things and have trial and error. And this is extremely precious to me. I was able to discover Judaism because I grew up in a liberal society. And so the last thing I would want to do is take that freedom away from anyone.
Yeah.
So for me, left-wing values I never lost them. I never gave up on them. I just felt they weren't enough. And so for me, it was integrating whatever was precious for me, always has been and has remained precious about the secular and left-wing world, and just adding to it. And maybe it was added in such a way that now, on the outside, or you talk to me briefly, I would be placed more, obviously, on the more religious or right-wing end of the spectrum. But if you speak more to me, and I think that's the ideal, is you integrate both sides of the story. So I think that's an important thing to have in mind. And the other thing is, you asked, so what can we do about this? How can we get this across? So for me, this has been the biggest question I'm asking myself over the past 25 years, ever since I was able to discover this chasm, realize that it is a chasm. There's truth on the other side also, and cross it. My first question to God was, okay, so if Torah and Judaism is so amazing, and I want to be part of it, and it's part of me, why did you make me so secular for the first 26 years of my life? And the only answer I could come up with was, because I need to use it, and I need to be like a translator, a mediator.
Mm-hmm.
And I think everyone who has, and everyone who's modern religious has the same ability. With everyone who has a footing in both worlds, it's their obligation, it's their mission, I think, to be a mediator, to be a translator, to try and find. It's all about language and finding the right words and finding the right way. Like you did with that guy, you told him a little bit about Shiloh, and he saw things he didn't see before.
I think there's something else about that, about having those footings. I would say that I have those footings too, although not quite as far in either direction. But I went to yeshiva day school. My father's a rabbi. that I went to Columbia University. So I got a little bit of both sides, and I feel
there's an advantage to the extremes, and there's an advantage to the being closer to the center.
I mean, I feel very comfortable in both worlds. Yeah. But what you find also, though, is that when you're in both those worlds, that's a huge advantage. And when you talk about left and right and liberal and conservative, it doesn't mean really what it means today, like the huge divides between, the left and the right. The left and the right is different than liberals and conservatives. Yeah. Liberals and conservatives can have, legitimate, intellectually honest discussions and come to places that are, reasonably satisfactory. The left and the right are just, at war with each other. Yeah. And so there's a huge value to having some exposure to both. Very few, in this world right now, very few people really get that because our institutions are not created to accommodate both sides of the spectrum. But you did, and really in ways that are extraordinary. How are you spending your time trying to, your comments to me were so astute. I hope you're not just telling them to me. I mean, who else gets the benefit, and how do they benefit from this wisdom?
So I write books and I teach, and I teach in both Hebrew and English. I have a YouTube channel and Spotify, whatever, in both Hebrew and English.
Under the name Nir Menussi?
Yeah. But it's called Worlds of Wisdom with Rabbi Nir Menussi. And so I use the fact that I got my English through all those years of denying my Jewish identity. So I got reasonable English out of it. So I'm able to teach in both languages, and I wrote some books, and I'm trying to get them translated. And in all of them, what I try to do is two things. One is to take the wealth of Torah wisdom and to demonstrate its relevance to contemporary issues, whether it's modern psychology, feminism, the LGBT movement, political science. All these topics are modern topics. People talk about them today. There are so many debates around them.
Yeah, those are like
and the Torah, and incredibly, the Torah has so much to say about all of them, but you just need to connect the dots, and you need to find the right Torah sources and to show what insights you can get from those old ancient books. They have a lot of wisdom in them.
Yeah.
And so one thing I'm trying to do is to show that Torah can shed light on contemporary issues. And the other part of what I'm trying to do is to bring modern sensibilities and insight and ideas from modern science, from modern politics into the traditional world, because the Orthodox world tends to be too conservative or not so open. It's very suspicious of anything new. That's part of what helps it preserve itself. It's also what sometimes closes it up to new inspiration. Sure. And so Judaism has always had this back and forth, this dialogue, basically, with the world. So I'm trying to keep that in my own little way, to keep that dialogue alive and going, and we all need to share in this.
Well, look, I think you may be the right person at the right time, because it's certainly the right time. Look, we're at a point, and I think our evolution as humans, not just Jews, non-Jews, but I can tell you back in the States, here everybody's, right now tied up with survival, and it's not the time for that much self-reflection and self-doubt, although there's, I'm sure, some of it going on. But, in the States, there's just a hunger, a thirst for, enduring values and truth and what's real and what matters, and, how should we live our life? How do you lead a meaningful life? What really gives you happiness and listen, there are people,
as individuals, as families, as communities, as
you've got a whole society. I can tell you, because I know a lot of them, a whole society, incredibly successful, wealthy people who are absolutely miserable, and their kids are falling off the cliffs. I mean, just not on any path that makes their parents happy or proud.
Mm-hmm. And makes them happy.
It makes them happy. I mean, we're a very troubled world right now. I think there's just and And then you got people, I mean, I think Israel, it's interesting because, I don't know if this study means anything, but, there's somebody does this happiness study, world happiness study. I have no idea how they do it. It may just, but Israel, the top 5 countries are Israel and 4 Scandinavian countries. I don't know what makes Scandinavians happy, but I do know what makes Israelis happy. I mean, generally speaking, the happiness that Israelis derive is from a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning. They feel like they're doing something, that's important, and they have a sense of why it's important to keep Israel together. They understand that their backs are up against the wall, and they're fighting for that one Jewish state. And having a sense of purpose and meaning is really, I think, the secret for happiness. That, and having your health and good family.
Just that it's not just a sense of purpose and meaning, but it's actual purpose.
It's actual purpose and meaning.
And also with that it has to be something. It has to have something of the transcendental in it also.
Mm-hmm.
Not just a meaning that we made up or a purpose that we gave ourselves. The meaning of something has to come out. Has to come from outside of it. Has to come from somewhere higher. You don't have to be a mystic,
right?
But having that connection to something that's beyond, I think.
The word that I hear people use a lot, which is, I think, the same thing, is they say they want something which is authentic, something real, something that's stood the test of time, something that is immutable, and it ultimately, it all goes back, I think, to a sense of godliness and a sense of, a higher purpose and higher values. And, I'm looking at this from the perspective, narrow perspective of, we can advance all of that by tying ourselves back to the places, where this truth was revealed. It's not the only way, and it's not the single way to bring people back to these authentic values, but it's one of the ways that I think has to fit in, as you say, within this tapestry of experiences and knowledge that will hopefully bring us back to a far more meaningful, authentic place. I want to thank you very much for all you're doing. Forgetting about this conversation, which I enjoyed tremendously, but thank you for what you're doing. You really have something to share. I think that's unique, and I would encourage everyone to listen more and to watch more. Nir Menussi on your what's it called again? One more time.
Nir Menussi.
You Google Nir Menussi, and you have a YouTube channel, and do it. It's worth it. The most interesting topical issues that are viewed under the lens of a 3,000-year-old wisdom of the Jewish heritage. Very unique.
And thank you for everything you've been doing and for keeping this topic alive and contributing so much to the connection of the Jewish people to this place, and in a way I think will benefit the entire world.
I hope so. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nir. Pleasure.
My pleasure also.
My friends, One Jewish State is hot off the presses. Just been published. It is the intellectual foundation for Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. It's a book which makes the case for Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria as being good for Israel, being good for the Palestinians, being good for the region, being good for stability, and I would add, it achieves God's will as set forth in the holy texts. So I hope you'll buy the book. It's available wherever you buy books. Obviously, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. You can get it at lots of different places. You can just Google it and find it, and they'll ship it to you overnight. And it is One Jewish State, the last best hope for peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Enjoy the read.